Dereta, dereta, dereta. Stop, stop, stop. Okay, okay. Up, 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 up. Don't move. Asparagus.
Hey guys, what's up? It's Stephanie and welcome back to my channel. So in the video today, I'm going to be talking about how I studied differently from my didactic year in comparison to my clinical year. So I'm currently a second year PA student. I finished all of my end of rotation exams. So I got kicked out of rotations in March. I'm currently recording this in July and I've been out of rotation since then. But I've done most of my rotations. Even though I was out of rotations because of COVID-19, we still had our end of rotation exam. So an end of rotation exam is basically how it sounds. It's an exam that you get at your end of rotation. Now the rotations lengths tend to depend on the program you're applying to or the program you attend. For example, one of my classmates that I did a rotation with, she was from a different program and her rotations were about 6 weeks versus mine were about 5 weeks. So the rotations tend to differ, but nevertheless, me and her still had an exam for the same rotation at the end of the rotation. So regardless of the length, you're still going to have your end of rotation exams. And your end of rotation exams are not written by your program. They are actually written by the National Society of the Physician Assistants. So nationally, PAs, the physician assistants, will write these exams, and it's the same exam for all the PA programs nationwide. And you can actually go online and to their website, to the NCCPA website, and you can actually Google end of rotations, for example, internal medicine or emergency medicine, whichever one you're studying for, and they'll give you a blueprint. They'll basically tell you what topics you need to study. Some of the topics are broad, like acute abdomen. There's a lot of things that can fall under acute abdomen, and then there's really specific ones like otitis media or otitis externa, for example. There's also another page that you can see what is that national average. I know this would always freak me out because some of them would be like around 76, 77, and then I think the highest one which I saw, which was for psychiatry, was an 81. So that definitely freaked me out. But definitely studying for these exams is a little different than didactic year. For didactic year, I felt like my exams were a lot easier than my EORs. The good thing is that during your clinical year, you're not taking as many classes as your didactic year. So I know for my didactic year, I had to study for my clinical medicine exams, for my pathophysiology exams, anatomy, physiology, lab exams. You had so many exams versus your clinical year. You'll usually just have your quizzes that you have to do, your EOR, and then your OSCE. I know, for example, some programs may not have an OSCE for every rotation. My program does. My classmate, for example, she only had one OSCE that was done at the end of her clinical year, but for us, we have an OSCE for every rotation. So that's another thing you can ask when you are applying to PA schools. Ask them how often do they have their OSCEs, because this differs according to the program. So what is an OSCE? Basically, an OSCE is where they measure and they test you on how your skills of performing a physical exam are. Basically, you'll have a patient. It's like a fake patient. It can be a student or just a real patient sometimes, but they're faking that they're a patient. You have a professor in the room. You go in. They'll give you a complaint, whether it's abdominal pain. You have to go and you have to ask an HPI. You have to make sure you're asking the correct questions. You have to do the correct physical exams, right? So on a patient that is complaining of acute abdomen, you're not going to do an exam for musculoskeletal, right? You're not going to look at their ankle or anything like that because it doesn't go with an abdominal exam. So you want to make sure that you're doing the correct physical exam. You also want to make sure that you're doing the physical exam correctly. So if you're doing an abdominal exam, you want to make sure that you're doing everything correctly and you're following it in the proper sequential order that is supposed to be done. And then after that, it's as if you're working up a patient. Then you have to work up the patient. You're going to say, hey, I'm going to order a CBC, an ultrasound, etc. on this patient. And then they'll tell you, okay, this is what you found. And depending on what the findings are, that's how you're going to do a treatment plan for the patient. So then you have to go explain the treatment plan to your professor and then also educate the patient on the condition that they were complaining of or coming in for. So that's basically what an OSCE is. So during my clinical year, I just have to prepare for the OSCE and then I have to prepare for the end of rotation. So really you only have 2 exams throughout the entire rotation. Now, the time you're going to spend for each exam really depends on your time management for sure, and then also on the rotation you have. For example, for my surgery rotation, I've said this probably multiple times. If you've seen my surgery videos, is that in surgery I was there for a long time. It was a really long day. I was there from 6 a.m. sometimes to 12 a.m. I would have breaks in between, and then when I did have breaks, I try to go through my flashcards. And then you had rotations, like, for example, some of my classmates had citation for psychology. That was not the case for my rotation, because my psychology rotation was very, very busy. But for example, for them, for their psych rotation, they would go in like 2 days a week or 3 days a week. They would only go in a few hours, or if they did go in every day, it was only like 5 or 4 hours. They would be out by 2 or 1. So they had the rest of the day to study. So this is why it depends on the rotation that you are in, the time that you're going to study for the exam. And then it also depends on your time management. Time management's really, really important. For example, for my surgery rotation, I had heard that exam, the end of rotation exam, was a really, really hard exam. And especially since you don't have a lot of time to study for that surgery exam, I made sure that I made time for studying for that exam. So for example, there would be days where I would get out early, and I say out early is around 5 or 6 p.m. And these were the days I got out early. So when I got out early, I would sometimes try to study. Sometimes I would just be so exhausted, or I would be catching up on sleep from the previous day, and I would sleep. So sometimes during the week, it was very difficult. And I'll be honest, with most rotations, this is a case. It's very, very difficult. So I dedicated time to studying on the weekends. So I made sure that on the weekends for every rotation was my studying day. I made sure I woke up at 9. Back then where Starbucks were open. I would wake up at, 8:30, and then I would go and drive to Starbucks, stay there from like 9 to 9 p.m. or 10 p.m., 11 p.m. if I was like pushing it. So literally I was there all day. So I would get there, get like a venti latte, drink that, and then of course I would bring my lunch, or I would order something from Starbucks, and I would stay there all day, because I know if I went home, I would not be able to get anything done. And I did this on Saturdays and Sundays. And then throughout the week, like during surgeries, I would sit down and just go over flashcards, because repetition is a key, guys. I can't say that enough. Make sure that you're repeating information every day, because these exams are at the end of your rotation. So literally, like from day 1 to day 30 or day 31, you have this entire time that you're studying, and you want to make sure that you have that information fresh in your mind, and you're repeating it over and over and over and over again. I use flashcards also for my didactic year when I was studying. But the thing with your didactic exams, guys, is that with didactic year, for example, for my program, is that you only studied specific body systems. So for example, we would focus on GI for the entire month, which is only GI. It's a lot of information, but it's not that much. Versus your end of rotation exams, it's everything. You have GI, you have cardio, you have dermatology. I mean, it's a lot of information, especially for your exams that are like internal medicine, your exams that are family medicine, your emergency medicine, your surgery exams. Now, for example, for OB-GYN, those are specialties, so it's not as difficult as your larger exams. But if you go onto the website and you look at the blueprints for your ER and your family medicine and your internal medicine, it's 5 pages. It's a lot of information. And like I said, some of these topics are broad, like acute abdomen. I mean, there's so many things that can fall under there. So that's why you have to make sure that you study every day if you can, and that you're repeating that information, whether it's through flashcards or whether you're testing yourself to see what you need to know, whether it's through questions. Now, also, how did I study? Basically, how I studied is that during my clinical rotations is that, of course, like I said, there were 5 weeks. So the first 3 weeks, what I did is that I went and I learned the information. You would be surprised how much information I forgot during my didactic year, that I had learned in my didactic year, or just new information that I was learning that I had not learned in my didactic year. So make sure that you are prepared for that. You are definitely going to be learning new information during your clinical year versus your didactic year, something that you were not taught. So I saw myself having to do that a lot. Was having to go through textbooks, go through videos, YouTube videos or osmosis videos to learn this new information. So the first 3 weeks I did that, and then like I said, every day I would do flashcards. And then the last 2 weeks, what I did is that I did a lot of questions. So I did a lot of practice questions. The question banks that I recommend definitely are going to be your Rosh review. Rosh review is great. If you have a large class of students, then you can get a huge discount, like about 25% off if a lot of your classmates sign up for it. And that's what my program did, is that one of our classmates created a huge one for our program, and a lot of us signed up. If you have more than 50 students, at the time when we applied for it, we got a 20 or 25% discount, which is really good. And I got mine for 2 years. I really recommend it. And I've been using that for studying throughout my end of rotation exams, and I'm going to use that for PANCE also. And the good thing about Rosh review is that the questions are hard, and they're similar to the questions you're going to see on your end of rotation exams and on your PANCE exam. So I really recommend that. So I did a lot of Rosh review questions. If you're a visual person, they have really good pictures that will definitely help you during your exam. Sometimes, like, if I couldn't remember anything about the disease, I could just remember that picture and it would help me get through the question. Also, another one that I used was SmartyPants. I love SmartyPants. They have flashcards. They also have basically a topic list for your exams. And so the topic list that is on the blueprint on the NCCPA website, they basically go through that topic list and they do it for you. They answer it for you versus you having to go and look for the things that fall under acute abdomen. It's already done on SmartyPants. You don't have to waste time on doing that. So you can definitely go through that route, and that's why I really like SmartyPants. And they also have a lot of questions. They have for example, your OB-GYN question exam. They have a family medicine question exam. So the more questions, the better. My program also offered Exam Master, which was free, so I used Exam Master a lot. And then UWorld is really, really good. UWorld for physician assistants students, it's really good. It has a lot of questions, but these questions are very, very hard. They require a lot of critical thinking. So I know when I was taking these questions, I would feel very demotivated because I kept getting them wrong. But then when I took like my family medicine exam, I got a 91. I got a really, really high grade. And I think it was because of UWorld, because most of these questions were extremely difficult. And when I was taking the end of rotation exam, I was like, you know what, this is so easy compared to UWorld. So that's basically how I study. And also, some of the other things that I do when I am studying for my EOR, the first 3 weeks, like I said, is that I usually learn the information. I really recommend PA End of Rotation Exam review book. It's a great book. I'll post a link below. I use that, and then on top of that, I also use PANCE Prep Pearls book. And then I used also the Rosh review book. They have a Rosh review book, which I'll list the links below. Great books. So I used all this to supplement my studying when I was studying. So I really, really recommend these things for studying. So basically the difference, like I said, when I studied during my didactic year and clinical year is that in clinical year your exams are a lot harder than your didactic year. You have a lot more information, but you don't have as many exams as you used to during your didactic year. At least for my program, you didn't. So there's really no excuse to not focus on your exam when you are in clinical year. And you want to make sure that you're keeping that information fresh. It's a lot of information, and you have really, really good time management. Whether I know it's some of my classmates that will usually study from day one also, and they'll study the entire time, but at the same time they're also doing questions like every day. But this just really depends on you. For me, what worked out is that the first few weeks I made sure I learned the information, and in the last 2 weeks I did a lot of questions to see what my weaknesses were, and then whatever my weaknesses was, I would go back and study more, or I would add more flashcards onto my flashcard deck about that topic. Whether it is, for example, my big weakness is endocrine, so endocrine is really weak for me, I would go and add a lot more flashcards for endocrine, or just make some flashcards for endocrine. That way, when I take the exam, I make sure that I excel in these areas. But yes, that's basically how I study differently in between my didactic year and my clinical year, is that during your clinical year, guys, you're going to have a lot more information. The exams are definitely going to be a lot harder in comparison to your didactic year. So you have to make sure you have a really good time management, and then on top of that, you're in clinical rotations also. And then depending on what rotation you are in, is depending on how much time you're going to have to study. So you have to make sure that you treat that time precious. Like I said, I usually use the weekends to make sure I catch up on all my studying. If I couldn't do it during the week, whether I was too exhausted or I just didn't have time, then I use those weekends to study for my exam. And then I know it's sometimes really, really hard and difficult to do that, because usually your weekends are the days that you relax, but that's what I would do, and that's what helped me. I did really well in all my exams, my EORs. I aced all of them except for my first one, because my first one I didn't know how to study. I was trying to do the same thing, the same type of studying during my didactic year, which didn't work. So I made sure I had to implement more flashcards, because it's a lot more information depending on which end of rotation exam you're taking, and then implementing a lot of practice questions, because it's all about practice questions. Practice, 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 because then you see patterns, and then when you're taking the exam, your brain will pick up on those patterns. But yeah, hopefully this video was helpful for you guys. If you guys have any questions for me or anything like that, make sure you comment below, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye.